what does it look like to stand in your power? That's what's important to me. It's not that you're always speaking up and the first person to speak. Hell, some of the most powerful women I've ever met in my life were women of very few words. But when they spoke, room shifted.
This is your Kick-Ass Life podcast, episode number 373 with guest Leslie Lyons.
This is the Your Kick-Ass Life podcast with Andrea Owen, a no BS guide to self-help and badassery. Because ladies, let's face it, life's too short for it to not kick ass. And here's your host, the girl who serves it up straight with a side of crazy, Andrea Owen.
Hey there, ass kickers. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. Hey, if you know somebody that you think should be a guest on this podcast, I don't know, maybe if you were listening to another podcast and thought, Andrea would love talking to this person, or I think everyone should hear what this particular expert has to say on whatever personal development topic it is, shoot us an email, support@yourkickasslife.com. We're happy to check this person out and see if they're a great fit and then possibly invite them to be on the show. Or if you want to pitch yourself, or if you know of someone who would be great on the show, you can also use our pitch application that we have on the contact page, yourkickasslife.com/contact, where we review them and see if they are a great fit for the show. So thank you for participating and helping this podcast be even more amazing than it already is. I have such a fun guest for you today. Leslie Lyons is on the show, and she has such an interesting career that spans selling sex toys and pole dancing. And this conversation is one that excites me so much. No, it's not about sex toys, but it's about women who feel like they're too much and, speaking up and that type of thing. And then the conversation meanders over into Christianity, which I haven't talked a whole lot about on the show. And she kind of comes out and asks me, like, where do you stand on this? And I'm like, no one's ever asked me this on the show. And so we have a very candid conversation about it. And I just wanted to give you a heads up that that's where it goes. I like to talk about a lot of different things on this show. And I always get very curious about my experts' experiences and what has shaped them to be the person that they are today. Fast forward into 2021, I'm really excited because we have some changes that are happening over here on the podcast, as well as just with me in general. I've had Your Kick-Ass Life as my brand and my business it was 10 years in September. In 2021, it'll be 11 years. And I've been kind of itching to switch things up a little bit. I didn't know what that was going to look like. And I had a meeting with my team this morning, and we are going to release some of these changes in June of this year of 2021. And late last year, I was telling you about this new podcast series that I was going to have. It was a new kind of freebie, and I said it was going to be ready in January. We decided to actually drop that in June as well so that we can prepare it better, as well as it's going to coincide with my new book that's coming out. And I am going to release the title to you. I can't remember if I've told you or not what the title is. Maybe I have. I tend to forget things lately. I don't know, burnout, middle age, lots of things going on. You feel me. I know that you do. All right, so stay tuned for that. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest if you don't know her already. Leslie Lyons is the founder of Bombshell Movement Studio in Chicago, host of Beyond the Pole, Tales from the CEO podcast, and a sales and leadership coach for female entrepreneurs. With a background in corporate sales, youth ministry, and as a leader for studio owners throughout the U.S., Leslie has spent her life pouring into women emotionally and spiritually. Now more than ever, her dedication to helping entrepreneurial women lead with their heart and head is exactly the type of leadership we need. So without further ado, here is Leslie. Leslie, thank you so much for being here.
Oh my goodness. Andrea, I am so stoked to be on your show today. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited, and I know that this could be a 2-hour call. So let's get into it, because your background and your story runs the gamut. Like there's so many different things I want to touch on, but can you start by telling us your personal story of how you came to do the work that you do? It's super interesting. So tell us about it.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again for allowing me to be here. I'm super excited to talk about it. But so I guess I have two stories because I'm actively living them now. So for your listeners, those who don't know me, my name is Leslie Lyons. I have two businesses, primarily for the last 15 years. I own a brick and mortar sensual movement studio here in Chicago. So we help women reclaim their voice and their power through sensual movement. So anything that is sexy and embodied. So pole dancing.
I was just about to ask, like, how do you define sensual movement?
Yeah, anything that is sexy and embodied. So it could be pole dancing, it could be chair dancing, it could be vixen dancing, it could be ecstatic dancing, anything that makes you feel alive and powerful in your feminine frame. That is what we do. And I've done that for the last 15 years. Well, about 3 years ago, I moved into the coaching space because for so many years, I had other business owners reaching out to me saying, hey, how did you make this work? How is this working? And it's a taboo industry. How do you advertise? How are you doing so well? And I was like, well, there's a couple of things that I've done and I can teach you. And so literally that's how I moved into the coaching space. And I started coaching specifically within the sensual movement industry. And about a year ago, I branched out and started working with other businesses that look to empower women in non-traditional ways. And so I work with estheticians, I work with makeup artists, I work with salon owners, I work with feminist accountants, I work with the gamut, the people who you wouldn't necessarily look to them like we would to a life coach like yourself. But these are women who encounter other women and they empower them through day-to-day interactions. How can they put a different spin, if you will, on the accounting services that they offer? How does that make women better and in turn make our world better? So that's what I've been doing the last 15 years. Before that, I was in the corporate rat race. And so I've got tons of stories that I could share about how I not only survived in that and thrived until I decided it was time for me to leave.
Okay, well, I want to shift gears and talk to you very specifically about a particular emotion that we chatted just for a little bit about before we started recording, and it is anger. And so I was doing some research for my third book that's going to come out later this year. And, no one's going to be surprised by this research. And that women are, when they are seen negatively, if they are perceived as angry, aggressive, and powerful, and they're seen positively if they're perceiving men that way. So can you talk to us about, I just want to know your take on it, and if you have any advice just around that whole emotion, just in general.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, do I? Because there's a couple of different things. First of all, anger is just an emotion, and I don't label emotions positive or negative. I believe that emotions have been given to us by God for a reason. And so every emotion has a purpose, and anger has a very powerful purpose when yielded with precision. Anger is what gets shit done. It is any major change that has happened politically, socially, probably even in your own sphere. There was probably an angry person, someone who was fed up with the status quo, that decided that things were going to change and they were going to change today. And they put all of their energy behind that to shift things into another direction. Anger is a powerful emotion, and it only gets a bad rap in Western society as it relates to women. And if you truly are a person who's just explosive, right? Like your anger has no purpose, it just blows up and detonates everything around you. It's what are you doing with your anger? Does it have purpose? Or are you just a ticking time bomb ready to go off about everything? And you're angry because it's snowing, There's no purpose behind your anger. So For me, I've always thought, and I know you said this, Andrea, offline too, because we're both Enneagram 8s and our core emotion is anger. So it's very
Mhm.
accessible to us. We're very comfortable with it. But the question is, are others comfortable with our anger? Are they comfortable with how we show up in spaces?
In my head, I said immediately no, immediately no. People are not comfortable.
So exactly. And so because of that, the question is why though? And you made mention to it earlier, is how we're conditioned.
Yeah.
From a very early age, especially female identifying folk. We are conditioned very early that anger is not positive. If you want to be liked, if you want to be loved, if you want to get the guy, if you want to get the opportunity, you've got to be sweet and docile and agreeable and the caretaker and the one who is just completely selfless, damn near a martyr, give everything to someone. I was reading something just yesterday and I had to catch myself because I'm rebranding. And one of the things that's really close to my heart is sex trafficking. I've volunteered in organizations that fight sex trafficking for years. And I want to put it out there more in my marketing, right? But I read something specifically that said, be careful not to feed into the narrative that if you are a powerful woman and you're making money, that you have to be doing something that the world sees as good with that money.
Interesting.
It literally, Andrea, stopped me in my tracks
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to feed into any more harmful narratives and stereotypes or shame around women owning their power.
Yeah.
So I was like, man, am I putting my sex trafficking work out there because I want people to think I'm doing something good with the money I make so they won't be harsh on
Yeah.
me?
So, because it's not good enough to make money just for the sake of making money.
Exactly. Where men
And
never
God
have those
forbid you try to create wealth for yourself.
Exactly. So it's like, because that's the narrative, right? I call it the Cruella de Vil syndrome.
Oh my God. We are parallel lives. So I reference her in my book because she was my first model of a wealthy woman
Wow.
when I was 5 years old. And I was thinking back on, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just got so excited because I was thinking back on who are the role models for me growing up of women, of wealthy women. Well, first and foremost, there were zero that were self-made. And they were always either the widow or the wife or the daughter of a wealthy man. And then I'm like, well, the first wealthy woman, in any kind of story or anything like that was Cruella de Vil.
Yep.
And she was, I mean, if you Google like top 5 worst Disney villains, she's up there.
Oh, yeah.
Like she was terrible. And this was my model of a wealthy woman who made money. Like she was the worst. And there's some people who are like, oh, it's just a Disney movie. And I'm like, oh, no.
Mm-mm.
These are the things that matter to us, that get embedded into our subconscious and sometimes completely conscious, that make us the way that we feel about money and a lot of other things.
It's how women are viewed. When you think about it, I'm like, seriously, it's like if you make money, you must be evil and kill puppies for coats, period. And she was angry,
100% and mean to everyone, even the people that were helping her.
She treated everybody like shit. She was overbearing. She was all of the things. Fast forward that to something more modern, like The Devil Wears Prada, or just think about.
It was a slight improvement.
Just so slight. Look, so slight. Because it's always the powerful woman is this evil, lonely,
terrible relationship.
Yeah, she's got no relationships. She's just this woman that's dying on the vine, but she's got all this money. And so we have to be aware of what we consume and how that shows up for people. And so for me, I know that as an 8, we care a lot about the underdog. A lot of what gets us fired up and pissed off is when we see other people being taken advantage of. I tell the story because I use the Enneagram in my work all the time, but I tell the story about when I was literally in kindergarten. And I don't remember as much of the story, Andrea, as it's been told to me over the years by my parents.
Mhm.
But my mother shared with me that there was a little boy named Anthony. And if Anthony ever hears one of these podcasts, I pray his life is much better than it was then. I'm 48. So that was
Mhm.
a long time ago. He was a kid that probably didn't come from a very solid home, is probably the best way to say it. So oftentimes he was dirty. He didn't smell well because his home life was clearly problematic.
Yeah.
As a child, though, I wouldn't know anything about that. But what I did know is that it didn't seem right. It didn't seem fair for people to make fun of him. It didn't seem life giving. And it felt like he needed someone to stand up for him. And my mother talked about how I constantly stood up for him. If someone was talking about him, I would tell them immediately, that's not right. Don't say that. That's not nice. And I'm 5 years old,
Mhm.
taking a stand for somebody who was being oppressed. It's who we are. So why don't we look at women who have anger in that way? Like, man, she's somebody who will stand up for the underdog. I often say, I'm a voice for the voiceless. I will speak up, even in corporate, because I know you said a lot of your listeners are working 9 to 5 still. I
Mhm.
was that person in the room where the manager would be talking some silly mess and everybody would be looking over at me like, Leslie, when are you going to say something? Like everyone's waiting because they won't
They
speak up,
know,
but
yeah.
they know that I'm going to say something.
That was my mom. My mom was like, when she's retired now, but when they would actually come to her and say, "Can you tell, this person?" Because she was that one. Yes. Yeah. And the apple didn't fall far.
Yes, I
Mhm.
love that, Andrea. Like seriously, so why can't that be the narrative of angry women?
Yeah. That's such an interesting perspective. And I love that shift. And I want to just point out what you're asking people to do here. And it's the same thing I point out all the time for people. Like sometimes the ask is very big. We're asking you to just, be okay with being angry. And that's a big ask. So what if you just notice your perspective around it? What if you notice if you are judging silently someone who is speaking on the top of her soapbox on Facebook, whether you agree with what she's saying or not? We have these judgments, and every time I am judging someone, which, like, let's be honest, we all still do.
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
it's a flag for me to get curious about what's going on.
That's right. That's exactly
And
what I was gonna say.
especially if I'm like harshly judging,
Mm,
I think about like, what is it that I don't like about this person? And sometimes it's that anger.
I would get curious about why does that anger bother me?
Mhm,
Especially if it's
mhm.
not directed to you. If you're
Right.
just observing it on social media or you're watching a woman on the news tear up paperwork behind Trump's head, like why does that bother you so?
Mhm, mhm.
Get
Yeah.
curious about it. And what you'll probably find is, and I've heard people say to me, and you probably have had this happen, Andrea, as well. I've had women come to me and say, when I first met you, I didn't like you.
Oh, I've had so many people tell me that. Or I thought you were a bitch. That's what they say.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I didn't
Mhm.
like you. I thought you were a bitch, or whatever the thing is, I didn't like you. But once I got to know you and see where your motivation comes from, you're the person I want in my corner.
Yeah.
Like I can always trust you to be honest. I can always
Mhm.
trust you to be real. And so if you're bothered by that, and I've had one of my closest friends now, we started that way. And she said, you know what? It brought up in me was the fact that I felt my voice had been diminished and quelched. And I
Mm.
had no idea how to get that back. And so to see you living loudly, literally and figuratively,
Mhm.
made me desire that for myself. and it didn't seem attainable for me. So
Yeah.
I didn't like you because of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that may not be every woman's story who's observing an angry woman who's yielding it with precision. We're not talking about people who are being reckless. Let's be clear. We're talking
Or
about
cruel.
women,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, or cruel. We're not talking about that. That's a different situation, and those women need help. But we're just talking about someone who is voicing their opinion clearly, articulately,
Mm-hmm.
powerfully, and maybe their voice goes up a little bit. You got to get curious about why you're responding in that way to that person.
It's been about a good decade or so since I started to get curious about my judgments, especially of women. Changed my life. And I don't use that term lightly, but it shifted so much in me, and also allowed me to accept myself more and have more self-compassion, because for so long, and I know this is probably only a certain percentage of the listeners who can relate, but I was told I was too loud, which I want to talk about being too much here in just a second. And I squelched that. I got embarrassed very easily. I quickly learned how to judge a room and gauge people's reactions, whether it was on their face or their body language, to my own voice, to the things I was saying, to how loud I laughed, all of that. And just recently, so I'm making a gallery wall in my office
Oh,
of
cool.
art prints, and it's like, pictures of RBG and all these different things.
Mhm.
And there was one that I found on Society 6, and it's just a pair of eyes looking sideways. It's a little bit of a side eye / with a scowl eyes, just eyes, and at the top it says aggressive. And I saw that print and I was like, like, I need to have that. I need to order that in like a 12 by 18 and frame it and put it on my wall. And I did, because I have been called aggressive and I was
Mhm.
so ashamed of that. And now I'm like, well, you know what? God gave me this aggressive personality. I'm an Aries. I'm an Enneagram 8. I can't help it. It's in my DNA. And like, that's what I want for all women, whether they are loud or they are more, or they're a little bit quieter by nature.
That's right.
Like, I want you to not feel like you're wrong or bad or that you have to change.
Oh my gosh. This reminds me of Glennon Doyle's book, Untamed. She
Mm-hmm.
shared a story in there about her two daughters. And one daughter is probably an 8, just by how she describes her and her motivation to do things. And she tells this wonderful story about them going to get their ears pierced. And the outspoken daughter, for lack of a better term, she jumps up into the chair. She's ready to get it done. The woman is like, who's getting ready to pierce her ears. She's like, should we pierce one at a time or both at the same time? The little girl's like, let's do it. Just get
Mm-hmm.
it over with.
Mm-hmm.
And she's so excited, right? Well, the other sister is watching after this happens. The sister's earlobes swell up, all of the things. And so she quietly, but certainly says, I don't want to get my ears pierced.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman who's piercing her ears says to her, oh, do you see how brave your sister was? Come on, get it done. Right? Like, you need to do this. And
Yeah.
the long story short, the other sister still stayed in her resolve
Mm-hmm.
and was like, I don't want to do this. But she could tell that the young girl, that her daughter felt a little bit of shame around it because of how the woman responded to her.
Yeah.
Like, you're a coward, basically.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Yeah. You're wrong if you don't.
Right. Whereas bravery or strength looks different in everybody. Can you stand 10 toes? That's what I call it, because I'm from the hood.
Okay.
I call it standing 10 toes. Whatever you mean, what you say what you mean what you say.
Mm-hmm.
That's quiet strength. Strength doesn't have to be like you and I, Andrea, that's aggressive and forward and
Right.
loud and in your face. Strength can also be, no, I have a resolve. I'm sticking to my morals, my principles, my
Mm-hmm.
values, and I don't
It
have
comes
to
in
be loud
different
about it.
flavors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does it look like to be strong women? What does it look like to stand in your power? That's what's important to me. It's not that you're always speaking up and the first person to speak. Hell, some of the most powerful women I've ever met in my life were women of very few words. But when they spoke, room shifted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people can tune me out because I talk all the time. But like my mentor, when she speaks, shit shifts, man. Like room shift because she's such a presence with her words, with her demeanor, with her wisdom, all the things.
Well, I want to ask you about, this is definitely along the same lines of what we've been talking about. You have a powerful sentence on your website that says you weren't put on this earth to blend into the background. So again, along the same lines of what we've been talking about, how can a woman who's listening to this embrace her quote unquote too muchness if she feels like she is too much?
You know, and like you said, it's a big ask, right? Part of my journey, even just to where I am now, there was a time where I did try to fit in, Andrea. I don't know if you ever went through that, but I did try to tone down. I did, because it's only so much you can take of people always not liking you, or people always seeing you as problematic, or people always not inviting you to the table, kind of a conversation, before you start to look in and say, a very self-assured young lady turned into a very insecure person as I was growing up, because of being constantly told, you're too much, you're too this, you're not going to get a guy, you're not going to get the job, you're not going to get the opportunity if you don't learn to tone down. And I'm also a Christian, and so church community plays a lot into that too, about what femininity looks like. And I was battling with that. And I lost myself for a point, and I was miserable. And it was like that natural confidence that I had, I call these people light dimmers. These people were constantly trying to dim my light. And for a period of time, I let them. I had to go on a journey of reclamation, and pole was a part of it, which is how I ended up owning a pole studio. But I had to get
pole dancing.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to get back in touch with my body, which is where my wisdom resides, which is where all women's wisdom resides. And pole was a tool that I used to start to reclaim my voice. So when I talk to women about not blending into the background, I talk to them about, what are you passionate about? What things in this world would you really like to see change? And I know that seems lofty and high in the sky, but it starts with purpose for me. If you don't have purpose behind what you do, it's going to have minimal impact. I help women unearth, what are you designed to solve? Because I believe every single person has a purpose. You were put here for a reason. What do you care about? Because even though we're both eights, Andrea, we both love justice, we both love the underdog, but I bet it shows up differently in our lives. Things that you care about, I may not even notice, and vice versa. So when you're looking to use your voice, because you've already got a voice, but when you're looking to use your voice, we do a lot of work around, what is it that you innately, not aspirationally, not what you've been told you should care about. What do you innately care about? And why does that matter? The most shy person, the most reserved person, the most introverted person, when you can get them talking about what they really deeply care about, they will talk till the cows come home. The search for voice always starts with, what do you give a damn about?
Yeah. I like to ask people the question, what pisses you off?
Yeah, real simple. And for some women, though, they'll be like, nothing. I don't, So that question for us is like, oh, let me give you a fucking list of,
what about this? What about this?
What about this and this and this?
Well, and start with the small things, and that'll probably kickstart.
Yeah, it's just like, what little things irritate you? What do you see that breaks your heart?
Mm-hmm.
You know, for some people, I'll be like, when the pissing off thing and they start giving me the him and Han, I'll be like, but what breaks your heart?
Yeah.
And usually that'll get people to kind of figuring out, what is it that I am put on earth to have an impact on? What am I here to change?
It's interesting when I have guests on where I'm unusually quiet, and this is, believe it or not, unusually quiet for me. I, I just feel like I'm listening to the best sermon, and I'm so glad I got to meet you.
Oh,
Okay,
thank you.
yes to all of that, an enthusiastic yes, and I want to ask you about what you call unshakable leadership, and this again is alongside with what we've been talking about. So, how do you define that, and what are some ways that women can harness their own unshakable leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. If 2020 taught us anything, it shook our world
Whew, yeah.
as an understatement. But there were still women leading. I was one of them. You were one of them. There are thousands of women who still had to lead during this pandemic. When I think of unshakable, I think of I am not moved by external forces. Now, I might bow, I might bend, but I'm not going to break. I am rooted in something that is deeper than what you can see. I'm rooted in my purpose. I'm rooted in my values. Everything else I wear loosely. So a lot of people, especially for people who are in corporate, especially young women, I mentor a lot of young women. They're always like, well, Leslie, my purpose and what job should I take and who should I marry and where should I live? All of the things. And I'm like, that type of stuff is loose. Wear that loosely. Because for me, I've been helping women for over 30 years, but the container in which I've helped women has changed every 5 years. The container can change, but what doesn't change is why you do what you do. When you know those things. And for some women, this is tough for them to start to figure out, which is where the Enneagram comes in, of course. This is why I use it as a tool, because it helps to unearth your innate values, your innate strengths, your innate shadow, so that you're a lot more self-aware, so that you can lead from a place of strength. So to be unshakable is to be rooted in purpose, strength, and values.
I'm interrupting this conversation to bring you a few words from some of our sponsors. Personally, I love a good, beautiful, simple, classic jewelry design. That's why I went bonkers over Ana Luisa's gorgeous pieces. That's Analuisa. I recently ordered their gold double hoop earrings, and I'm obsessed with them. They are so beautiful. A couple of the many reasons I love their jewelry. They have exceptional quality, long-lasting pieces crafted with care from the best noble metals. They offer a 365-day warranty to replace or refund any piece that doesn't meet your expectations. And they have fair prices, jewelry starting at $39, and there's no luxury markup. These pieces are a fantastic gift for yourself and the ones you love. And right now, Ana Luisa is having 15% off all products. The last day to guarantee standard shipping before Valentine's Day in the US is Tuesday, February 10th. Just go to analuisa.com, ANALUISA.com, and get 15% off the entire site for Valentine's Day. For those of you who don't know a whole lot about the Enneagram, I had Jessica Dixon on a couple of months ago. So we'll drop that link in the show notes. And what is your favorite? I just want to ask you real quick on the Enneagram. What is your favorite place for people to go take the Enneagram test? Because I went to their website. Is that the place that you send people?
The Enneagram Institute.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
okay. I think it was like $12.
I was going to say for
the
price. I think it's the most cost-effective way. And if people don't even want to spend $12, here's another resource, trueself.io. That's actually a free test. And it's probably one of the best free tests that are out there for sure.
Okay. Yeah, like don't take a BuzzFeed quiz. That's going to tell you your Enneagram. But it was a long test. The one I took me a good solid 40 minutes.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And it's a
Mhm.
great starting place. I think I was listening to the young lady you had on about the human design, and
Mhm.
she was saying, and she brought up something that I thought was very valid and worth noting, is that these tests are only as good as you are self-aware,
Yeah.
which is why human design is different than the Enneagram. It is common for people to mistype themselves in the Enneagram world. So I always tell people, no matter what test you take, it's probably about 70% accurate, unless
Mhm.
you're extremely self aware.
Okay.
And if you're extremely self aware, then it's a great tool. If you're not, you probably do need to get with a coach who can kind of get at some things that we know, like childhood messaging and that sort of thing that doesn't really come up on the test, that could really make sure that that is your type. Um, you got to try it out. It is not
Yeah.
as finite for some people as it was for eights. Eights are extremely self aware by nature. And what a lot of people see as negatives, we see as positives. So 9 times out of 10, if you're typed an eight, you're probably an eight. You're probably
Yeah.
an eight. But yeah,
Even
that's
with
a
an
great
8
place to
wing.
start. Yeah.
I'm friends with a decent amount of 7s, which is the
Mm-hmm.
enthusiast
Mm-hmm.
that have an 8 wing, and the 8 is the challenger.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to kind of shift gears and talk about, because I was partly stalking you out slash researching
Yeah,
and
I love it.
reading every word on your website. And you talk about your faith and
Mm-hmm.
you identify as a devout Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about if your spirituality has evolved over time. Like, do you have the same beliefs that you had when you were a child? And what does that journey look like? Because we didn't even get into this. So you used to have sex toy parties, which I've
Yes.
hosted one of those before. Those are
Woo-hoo.
fun. And you do pole dancing. So it's like, I wouldn't, like, if I heard all of those things, I wouldn't be like, she's probably a devout Christian.
She's a heathen. That's what she is.
So tell us about that.
Well, honestly, so let's start there. First of all, I didn't grow up in the church. I
Okay.
was an adult when I came to faith. So, while I was around the church, I was not one of those kids that grew up in the church, like there every week. I had relatives who took me to like vacation Bible school, and I would go to church, you know, a couple of times a year with an aunt, that sort of thing. So when I got saved, I was a full-fledged adult. So I had already been living for quite some time before God came into my life. So as it relates to my religion and my understanding of God evolving, it evolves as I know more about who he is and what he wants for my life. But in terms of how I think, like about the world and those sorts of things, no, it really hasn't changed, to be candid with you. It's shown me more about me and what I need to do and how I need to be moving in purpose than it informs me about the world that we're in. I always tell people God is a very personal God. He's
Mhm.
very concerned about you as an individual and you exercising agency over yourself and doing what you've been called to do. And that if everyone did that, starting from a place of honesty, then we could be more open and sensitive to the needs of others. But when we're blind to ourselves, we cannot help other people. So whether you are a Christian or not, or if you're into human design, or if you're into the Enneagram, or if you're into coaching, or whatever it is, the path to self awareness is where all change starts. I just happen to use the Bible as a tool to help me with self awareness. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, I'm always curious about people who, well, and I told you before we started recording, and I'm like,
uh-huh,
I'm going to ask you about your faith, and it's
yeah.
strictly a selfish question, because mine has really ebbed don't know if it's flowed, but it's definitely ebbed. So I did grow up going to church
Mm.
and pretty, weekly Sunday school youth group. And I recently found in this photo album that I had made. It was a project during confirmation. And so I grew up Lutheran, which I heard was Catholic light.
It is.
Now I'm starting to realize it very much was just kind of like a junior version. We do a lot of the same things in the Catholic Church, but just like less kneeling, and we don't pray to the rosary. I mean, that's pretty much it. Like everything else is pretty much the same. And so in 8th grade, I had done this project to get my confirmation, where it was a 10 Commandments project.
Mhm.
And it's hilarious. Like if I look at it now in my 8th grade bubbly handwriting and talking about, sins and don't be this person, only be this person. It was very black and white.
Mm.
And like there's no nuance in there at all. No room for nuance. Like don't have sex before marriage, like very, very strict. And it just made me think about this whole journey, and definitely over the last decade or so. So when my kids were little, I tried to go back to church, and it was one of those mega churches. And there was something it was a very interesting predicament I found myself in, because on one hand, I felt like I was at home. And on the other hand, I felt like something was very, very wrong. And I could not figure out what it was. So later on, I figured out, as I got curious about it, it was the community that I was missing, but it was the religious dogma that I didn't like. And it was the sort of strictness of it. And there was a lot of things going on in Christianity that I didn't agree with, just
Like what?
Like homophobia.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was confusing. It was super confusing, and I didn't know where to go. So I have since figured it out. And, the God that I believe in is very similar, if not exactly the same, to yours. And I love what you said about, can you say it again? Because I don't want to misquote you. Like, if we don't have self-awareness, then we can't help others out. Was that what you said?
Yeah, that's the gist of it. Yeah. Without self-awareness, all true change starts with self-awareness. Who am I before a holy God?
Yeah.
It's very important.
Well, and I've talked to my audience about this as well, is that I've become very interested in, and I didn't know where it came from, in like witchcraft and like psychic mediums. And I'm like, what is going on with that? Because that's, in Christianity, that's typically like not okay. But here's what I've come to realize. I'm taking the long way to tell this story.
I love it.
That since I was a child, have felt God or something on the other side talking to me. And I never knew what it was. And it's not a thought. And it's also doesn't sound like someone's voice in the room.
It's not audible.
And I told my mom about it, and she told me that it was God, and she was very casual about it. Just like, oh yeah, whatever. So then as I got older, I didn't hear it as often. And I was talking to a psychic medium, and she said, that's clairaudience. Like you can hear from the other side. That's definitely either your guides, angels, or God, whatever you want to call it. And I was like, holy shit, what? And so I've gotten interested in honing my, there's 4 clairs.
Okay.
And I believe that is God or something on the other side. And I'm not as interested in talking to dead people. Like if they want to come through, that's fine. I'll do that for people. But I'm more interested in hearing whatever it is that I need to hear, that is bigger than me, that fulfills my purpose, that guides me towards my strengths and like my reason for being here, to help other people.
Yeah.
I sometimes feel like I don't know what the next step is, but I know that if I tap into this, that it will tell me. So that voice is always genderless. I also didn't know that was kind of a signal that it's God or something else.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so curious about, I don't often ask my guests that question.
Yeah. But I put it out there. Here's something I want to say to you, Andrea.
Yeah.
Because this is what I hear a lot from people who walk away from the faith. Typically people who walk away from the faith, and of course I'm generalizing, so please don't send me hate mail, guys. But people who typically walk away from the faith, they come from legalistic environments. So it's almost what you described, very structured do's and don'ts. Like God is just
organized
this
religion. Yes.
Yeah. This God is just this celestial being with this rule book where
he's a punishing God.
Yeah.
That's how I grew up.
Yeah. And that's all he wants to do all day, is to catch you doing something wrong, you know, and you having to give penance for that for the rest of your life.
Right.
That is not the God of the Bible. yes, God is a God of justice, but God is also a God of mercy. God is a God of grace. God is a God of compassion. But he ain't want to play with either. Like it's kind of like parents, in that way. But I often hear people who walk away and start to explore other avenues is because of that. They see God as this person who doesn't mean them any good, doesn't mean our world any good. And that's not God. And so for me, I always tell people this: wherever you fall, just have a right view of God. Don't let man's view of God deter you from seeking him. Now, after you've sought him and you had your own relationship, if you decide to walk away, that's your choice. But don't let church, don't let Christians form your opinion about God. You need to make that decision yourself. You need to have an encounter with God yourself and then move forward. Because, yeah, every time I hear a story like this, I could predict where this was going just listening to you. Mm-hmm. That is not flourishing. That's not going to, God is not interested in you being a robot.
Right. Yeah, checking off the boxes.
Yeah, he gave you your personality. It goes back to what we were talking about. God gave you your personality. You said it earlier, like your voice, your presence, because you were meant to enter rooms and have influence in places that I can't. Mm-hmm. We need to know what our purpose is and walk in that thing. And so however you get to that point, I always say, don't let it be other people, though. Don't let it be organized religion. Don't let it be terrible Christians. Let it be your own experience and then go from there.
I wholeheartedly agree. And that's sort of where I ended up after that church didn't feel right to me, because I just felt like I need to just surrender to whatever this is. And again, get curious about it. Mm-hmm. And I'm confident that I will end up wherever I was meant to end up.
That's right.
And, because truthfully, and I feel like, hey, if you are a devout Christian and you participate in organized religion and it makes you a great person and it gives you purpose, I am cheering for you over here. Like I want that for you. And if it makes you feel good and, makes you a better person.
I don't want you to think of me as a great person, Andrea. I want you to think of God as a great God.
Yeah.
And anything that you see in me that is worth praising at all is because he put it there. Mm-hmm. And so for me, Christianity is not about, look at me and what I'm doing. Because if you look at me, Andrea, I'm a hot ass mess.
Aren't we all?
Like, I could be one of those Christians that made you say, forget church. You know what I mean? I'm always like, don't look at me, look at God. Because I'm crazy. Like, I'm a mess. I'm human.
Yeah, well, we're humans. Yeah, exactly.
Yep, I'm human. So I just encourage you as you're going along. So where are you at now? Let me ask you that. Where are you at today?
Well, I mean, I've been in the same place for a long time and felt like I definitely believe in God. And, I also am sober. So I went through Alcoholics Anonymous, which there's a God element in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
What was helpful is seeing a lot of people, and I hate to say that I was helped by this, but it was interesting perspective to see a lot of people really struggle. And by the way, I got sober in Utah, and a lot of the people that were in those rooms were sort of quote unquote recovering Mormons.
Yeah, Mormons.
And they had completely walked away from faith altogether because, quite frankly, of religious trauma. And from what I remember and what I understood of their stories. But it was interesting to see that perspective and also understand that I really believe that there is something bigger than us that connects us all.
Yes.
That is love, that really truly is love, that's inexplicable.
Yes.
And, the jury's still out with like Jesus. And like, I remember being a little kid, and they don't like critical thinking and people asking questions, but I remember being a little kid. And when I found out that you can survive for 3 days without food or water, I asked,
how did Jesus do it for 40?
And I was like, do you think he was just unconscious and he really wasn't dead? And then he just, and they were like aghast that I would question So it just, I've always sort of had that feeling. And I've also known in my bones since I was really, really young that I have been reincarnated. And I remember going to my pastor and sitting down with him, and I trusted this man. And he was a really great, great pastor. And he was my spiritual mentor. And I was so excited to like have this discussion with him. And he looked me straight in the face and said, we as Lutherans don't believe that. And I was crushed, Leslie. I was crushed, just like, we don't, who's we, and because and it was my first sort of experience of being told I was wrong for what I believed in. And I believed it in my bones and knew that there was something out there. And I
Did he ask you questions
it.
about how you got to that point? Or
No.
did he just tell you that?
Nope. No, that's not what we believe. And I remember like, it was almost condescending, like, oh, that's cute. Like pat you on the head that you would think that. And it felt even worse. And then I think that was the moment, like I did not trust people in those positions anymore.
As you shouldn't.
It's just been a little bit complicated, but I'm fine. A lot of people, I love my listeners so much. You guys don't need to take care of me. I'm not lost. I am very found.
I think it's interesting to me too, is that the same tools we use in coaching, curiosity, is also what's used in good ministry, by the way. Is just get curious about what the person's telling you.
Yeah.
I never answer questions people don't ask. I don't. So I'm more interested in what is it that you have to say. If you ask me what I believe about reincarnation, that's a different situation. But you as a child, you weren't asking it. You weren't asking him what he believed. You were sharing your experience.
Right.
Christians would be a lot better off if we learned to just get curious and shut up. I'll end it with saying this. I remember one time I was asked, because I was extremely judgmental when I was younger in my faith, extremely judgmental. And I remember praying and asking God, like, because God is not cool with that, by the way. For humans to be judgmental is to be sinful. Like for me to pass judgment on a person. And I was like, Lord, I know this is not pleasing. Why am I this way? How can I get out of this? And do you know what the answer was? And this was well before I ever even thought about becoming a coach. Curious. Get curious. Ask questions. Don't be so quick to tell people everything you think, because you could be wrong. How about that? And that's how I walk into situations now. It's like, let me get curious about what it is this person has to say. And only answer questions that you're asked.
I love that so much. And I just have loved this conversation. Before we close up, is there anything that you wanted to circle back to or say in order to feel complete?
No, this has been an interesting conversation for sure.
I'm like, had its twists and turns.
It has. And I was completely not expecting this today. But
thank you for being open to it.
Yeah, of course. I think the biggest thing that I would want to leave with your listeners today is about exploring their anger and tying that to purpose. I want more than anything for women to walk in their purpose and to own their voice. I want women to seek out tools that will allow them to put voice to the experience that they're living, knowing that things they've lived, things they know, the wisdom they have is what will shift our world. I know you said at the top of this is that you're a feminist. And I believe the work of feminism, at the heart of it is liberation. And liberation starts with using your voice. So if your listeners are looking for tools where they want to unearth their voice, I would love to walk them through that process. My Unshakable leadership process starts with something I call soulful values, because remember, at the heart of voice is your values. At the heart of values is purpose. It's a 90-minute session, and you walk away from that 90 minutes with a clear understanding of a roadmap, is what I always say. You have a clear understanding of what your strengths and shadows are. And what does it look like on the path to integration so that you can start to use your voice more? I would say if people are curious about that, hop over to my website, leslielyons.com, or you can follow me on Instagram, where you're going to see nothing but pictures of my puppy and my grandchildren.
I was gonna say, I can't believe you're a grandma.
4 of them, okay? 4 little people. Leslie D. Lyons as well. Andrea, I'm so appreciative of being on your show.
I am so glad you're here.
I'm like, you're such a rich person. I'm like, I love talking to women who have depth to them. And your story is such an inspiring story. So thank you for sharing that with me today and helping me to get to know you better.
Thank you so much for your time today. And yes, that's Leslie with an IE, D Lyons, Lyons with a Y. That link will be in the show notes, lesliedlyons.com. And everyone, thank you so much for being here. You know how grateful I am for your time. And remember, it's our life's journey to make ourselves better humans and our life's responsibility to make the world a better place. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Your Kick-Ass Life podcast. If you'd like some extra support, we would love to see how we can help you. You can apply for private coaching by simply texting the word apply to 33777, and the link will be sent to you.